Welcome to Plato's Cave. I'm Jordan Myers, and I'm a master's student in philosophy at the University of Houston. You're listening to a reading group episode of the show, which means that in this episode, I discuss the paper For the Law, Neuroscience Changes Nothing and Everything by Jonathan Greene and Jonathan Cohen, with three non-philosopher friends, Adam, Giffin, and Brian, because philosophy shouldn't just be for philosophers. And so this is the final episode in the Moral Responsibility and Free Will series, and this is a great paper, I think, to conclude on. It's an investigation into the legal and societal and cultural effects that debunking arguments from determinism cause. We talk about this paper at length, and I think it's an interesting paper. Green and Cohen dive into what discussing sort of debunking by determinism does to people's psychology and how this will affect changes in the law. And so, I think this is a good episode to kind of wrap up the series with, because it really kind of takes this philosophical question and exports it out into the real world and asks, okay, what effects will this have if it's spoken about and sort of absorbed in the popular culture? So this is the end of the series, as I said, but I certainly don't think and am sure that it won't be the end of discussing this topic in various episodes of the podcast. And actually, in the next series that we'll be doing, this topic comes up at length again in various political philosophy episodes. So with that in mind, I hope that you enjoy our discussion of Greene and Cohen's work, and I hope that you've enjoyed this series. It was a ton of fun recording it. My mind has changed on many issues, and I plan on circling back around to this both in my graduate studies and on the podcast. So I hope that you enjoy our final episode. So for this episode, we're doing a pretty famous paper, actually, by Jonathan Cohen and Joshua Greene, titled For the Law, Neuroscience Changes Nothing and Everything. And this was published in 2004. Brian, before we started the call, you said you liked this paper, right?
I just thought it was felt like an overview of general feelings I had towards free will over the past couple episodes. So
okay,
yeah, I don't know. I don't know that it really added anything to the conversation, but I think it just kind of broadened kind of like different scenarios. Like they bring up the one case study, which is the what was it, the Brazil boys or whatever?
Yeah.
And,
that's a good one.
I don't know. I just think it's just an interesting case. So
there was a lot of actually, there was some cool intersections here between like social psych work and cognitive psych work that I was not aware of, which was kind of cool to go over.
That's one area I thought that it added to the conversation. I liked the kind of frameworks, or at least like the models that I'm viewing this through, like of folk psychology and folk physics, because I that actually resonated well with me, and especially how that tied into the conclusion, just regarding like, I'm not really jumping the gun here, but can people truly kind of eschew or let go of like these retributivism beliefs? And it's like, well, even if it's deeply ingrained psychologically, yes, but in specific cases. So like in the same way that he says, like, in folk physics, there are intuitions we don't have, but that we can learn, but then apply in certain areas that are, that are needed. But then we can do the same thing with folk psychology, where it's like, we have an intuitive sense of free will, yet when it comes to our legal systems, we could possibly set aside, our intuitions in favor of an evidence-supported, non-retributivist view. So
that part actually like really hit home to me, because that honestly changing your lay notions about physics is essentially what getting a major in mechanical engineering is. You know what I mean? Like it actually does. It's kind of crazy to like your intuitions actually get changed. Like you don't see things the same way anymore. when you take all of those different classes on mechanics and, um, just all the different, forms of mechanics, whether it's fluids or thermal or whatever, right? Like you should just have different intuitions, which is kind of cool.
I would imagine that's true of any scientific field.
Yeah, it kind of has to be almost.
Learning about it's like just about learning about the nature of some set of things.
Yeah. Yeah, it honestly would be weird if it wasn't that way. Like you learn something, but yet your like you have to like consistently correct your intuitions after learning something and really like, that'd be kind of odd.
The religious biologist.
I mean, yeah.
I just liked the example they used, which was the a ball moving in a circle, or like on some sort of curved track, and when it leaves the track, a majority of people think that it continues to curve, and it's like, to be honest, it just brought me back to like 10th grade when I took physics, and I was like, honestly, that was kind of like a mind-blowing thing for me too, that you know what I mean, like where you're just like, there's no longer any force acting upon it, so it's not gonna change direction. And I'm like, but I remember I had that intuition that it would continue to curve. So so I just liked that example. So
and it almost, I liked how they played that. I mean, that they talked about that after they had talked about the anthropomorphizing of the triangle and the circle, right? And it's almost like, people, it seems like people are almost, it's like if you like, when you have the intuition that the ball is going to continue curving, you're almost like, I feel like you're projecting a psychology onto the ball or something, right? It's like, well, it's continue. I don't know. It's like you're not actually looking at it in terms of physics. You're almost looking at it in terms of like, if you were the ball, like what would you continue? It's something like that. It's not exactly that.
What is? I'm not sure what you mean by that. Can you elaborate?
So like, okay,
like
so
as if you were the ball.
Yeah. So okay. So like when this was kind of the point that they were making about when we anthropomorphize movement and action. Right, like we tend to, because they talked about that cool example where like they just showed the film of like like a triangle cornering a circle or whatever, and people would actually like project. People even like they even said people reported like projecting like retributivist impulse onto the triangle for like cornering the square. Like
what a bully.
They called it a bully. Like
the intuition
might deserve to be punished. Be like made into a square.
Punish the triangle.
But Giffin, what did you think of the paper generally? Yeah,
I enjoyed the paper for sure. I like what they brought up. It was, pretty straightforward and succinct, and it explored a lot of intuitions in a very, very practical realm, which I enjoyed.
Yeah, and you know what I loved about this paper? So maybe my favorite part about this paper is, Josh. I don't know if Joshua Greene. I think he's done other work in this area, not just this paper with free will intuitions. But the thing that I love about this work is, one of my biggest problems with what I've read of Dan Dennett, which is not obviously close to like all of his work, but I read, he has half of the book with Greg Caruso, who I talked with on the podcast, right, called Just Desserts. And I've listened to a couple interviews with him and read a few reviews with him, right? And the problem is like from what I understand, it almost is like he pretends that no one has libertarian impulses or like intuitions. He's almost dismissive of the idea that people do actually think that they have this type of free will and want this type of free will. And so like I love this paper because it really shows the importance of what this paper does is it really shows the importance of knowing the scope of the conversation with respect to who you're talking to, right? Like when I'm talking to you guys, we don't have to start with battling back libertarian free will. Like none of us believe in that. But to pretend that you don't have to do that with nearly every kind of non-philosophical person you talk to is, I think, deeply confused. Like I think Dennett has maybe just been in the ivory tower too long and like forgets that people actually do believe in like
folk intuitions, I think was a very good kind of conception that the paper brought up. I don't know if it completely originated in this paper, but at the very least, they perfected it.
Yeah,
I really liked the language actually that was I'm not sure we've ever used this language before, but I really appreciated the language used to describe the layperson's view of an agent is, in the sense, an uncaused causer.
Oh,
I loved that. I thought that was great because I'm like, that is actually exactly how people view.
Yes.
A lot of good language that previously, give me 1,000 years, I never would have just brought it like that, well together.
Well, that's only because you're caused in the wrong way.
True.
You're not determined by the good. only the past.
So here's a question for you. Would you rather people view not have this folk psychology and have this other more elevated view of psychology in terms of having a causer?
With it, this is like, so that question, well, maybe real quick, can I give like a 30,000 foot view of just kind of like what they say in the paper? And like the title, like the title really does spell it out, and Adam hit the majority of it, but just to kind of try to give a concise summary of the paper. So when they say neuroscience changes nothing, which is like the first part of the paper, they mean to say that, okay, all of these developments that neuroscience is bringing forth with understanding the brain theoretically should not make a difference because our legal system is not presupposing that people aren't determined at all, right? Like they're basically just acknowledging that like determinism is true, and therefore any behavior or thought process will have a brain correlate, right? So like this folk intuition that somehow, if you have free will, it can't free action can't be reflected in brain activity is like just nonsensical, right? But then the second half of the title, neuroscience changes everything, is that they're going to argue that, okay, even though people shouldn't have had this idea in the first place, and our system of law should not be theoretically grounded in that, the fact that people's intuitions do and will change will actually affect the law. So it will change everything for the law. But just, so just with that on the table, sorry, repeat your question, because it was a good one, Brian.
What did you think about, let's say then instead you could make it wave a magic wand and make the common folk kind of like, instead of subscribing to folk psychology, subscribing to like the more compatibilist, like, kind of having that bit of wisdom in there and of having a caused causer instead of an uncaused causer. Would you want that, or would you not want that?
I mean, yeah, I would.
Okay.
And it would honestly be kind of weird if it would be really weird if I didn't say yes, because then
that's what I was,
because then I would have to have some weird cognitive stance where it's like, I think I'm right. And I also think that there are happy benefits from it, but I don't want people to know that for some reason, But
I think the reason I asked that is because I think a lot of people want to cling to that intuition that they have, and I was just curious if anyone kind of fell into that category.
I just think the paper makes a good distinction, to be honest, where it's like, I don't think people need to, wholesale give up like that attitude or that perspective, in daily life. Like we've had talks at this point about viewing others agentically, right?
Yes.
I still want to preserve that, but when it comes to like legal systems, I think it's important to recognize that it's time to throw out retributivism, and you can only really do that when I think when you recognize that people ultimately don't have free will, and that the concept of free will is incoherent. So I do want to make one point though about this paper. Okay. I feel like more responsibility and free will often, like that, the lines blurred in this paper.
They were conflated.
Even hearing that, that statement by myself right there, I'm like, you know what I mean? Because I was more or less like following, like much of the verbiage of this paper, but I did see a conflation there, so I would probably amend what I said there.
Yes. This paper assumes that you are this paper assumes a one-to-one link between free will and moral responsibility. Like you can be an incompatibilist about I actually fall into this camp. Like I would say I'm in like a hard incompatibilist about determinism and free will, but not for I come out of the wash looking much more like a compatibilist at this point between determinism and moral responsibility. And they seem to act like that you could never make a reasoned distinction there.
Although I guess for the sake of this paper, I would probably describe myself as a hard incompatibilist when it comes to moral responsibility, free will, and the law. You know what I mean? Like once we're no longer talking about just like interpersonal relationships and just the values that constitute those relationships and the attitudes. I mean, if we're talking about law, then I'm just a hard incompatibilist.
Yes, that's why you heard me hesitate there when I said I kind of come out of the wash as looking like a compatibilist because it's all in the details of like what we mean there. Yeah. But so okay, this paper made me kind of think about. Do you remember this was before your time, Brian, in the series, but well, not before your time, but you're just out for that part of this the series.
I was but an infant.
Yeah. you were still being caused.
I was in my causing stages.
You hadn't graduated to your contra-causal stage that you're in now. Yeah. Truly deserving of retributive punishment.
Not even praise though.
It's like the reverse of the wolf paper. You're only fit for punishment, not for praise.
The masochist daydream.
Masochist, like read that wolf paper, like damn.
Masochistic asymmetry. That's the next paper.
that's my rebuttal to her views. What was I saying? You know what? Like Watson has that like wonderful turn of phrase where he says, whenever we discover you remember he laid out the case of Robert Harris about how he did those heinous things, and then he shows you the the circumstances of his upbringing, and he says, the intuition will change from that evil bastard to no wonder. He has that like nice phrase of no wonder what he did. And I feel like that intuition is exactly what Green and Cohen were talking about in this paper. Because I think this might be totally apocryphal. But I swear if it's not Greene, it's someone else like close to this work. But there have been studies done where when you do sort of pull back the veil as to the specific cause, people's intuitions do change there. But it's so odd, honestly, because so here's what I would like to know. I don't know the status of this empirical work. Because I wonder if there's a bit of like, I wonder if there's intuitions that are implicitly hinging on almost something like mechanism ownership here. Because so here's what I think I understand to be true about the literature in this area. So when you give people an example of someone doing something heinous, right? Could be the Charles Whitman case. Then you tell them something like he had a brain tumor. Their intuitions seem to change, as Watson says, from that evil bastard to, oh, well, no wonder. Like it wasn't really him doing it then. And they even use that language in this paper, Green and Cohen, right? But because, obviously the four of us get that there are causes. Everything is caused, right? I wonder if people's intuitions, and this is just, I don't know if this study has been done or not, but I wonder if people's intuitions change when you say, so Charles Whitman did the thing he did, but don't you understand? It was just because his brain fired in precisely this way. and you describe the way his neurons were firing or whatever, but it's not actually wrong. Or that hold on, I gotta walk back that phrasing. It's not an aberration from how a normal brain would fire. It seems to me like people's intuitions wouldn't change there if they understood that it's not different than how a brain would normally fire. I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I think no way.
Yeah.
I mean, I kind of I liked the language that Fisher used when he said that a component mechanism ownership is, you know, one kind of way of assessing is, you know, would this be a mechanism that I myself would own? You know, like, so I think when you talk about just a regularly functioning brain, you know, even if you broke it down into neurons firing, I think most people would say, well, you know, I have a brain that functions mechanistically in a similar way. So I, you know, take mechanism ownership of my own brain. Therefore, I would take, you know, ownership of a brain like that. You know what I mean? And maybe it's easier to see with like a tumor or brain damage where it's like, I wouldn't own a brain like that. So
you know,
in that sense, you know?
Yeah. You're actually making me think of maybe this is where the real importance of that moderate reasons responsiveness comes in, though. Because I'm thinking about another study that actually Cohen was involved in. If it's the same Cohen, there might be two Jonathan. No, I think it's the same Jonathan Cohen. This was the neuroscience study done by him and Sam Harris in his doctoral. No, this was well after he completed his PhD. This was in like 2016, I think this study was done, where, like, I think I've probably mentioned this to you before, Adam, at least maybe to Brian. It was like a long time ago that I remember talking about this. I don't remember if it was on the podcast or not, but like, okay, so there's this really cool finding where if you present, so they say they did this in California, and they took a sample of 42, I think, liberals, self-professed liberals on the political spectrum, right? And what they did is they asked them to rate their confidence in various questions on a scale from 1 to 7, right? And they asked them their confidence on political questions and apolitical questions, just very pedestrian ones. And then while they were in an fMRI machine, they were presented with counter evidence for only their strongly held beliefs, both political and apolitical, right? So one was, you know, I believe climate change is a real threat to humanity or something. And they presented them with counter evidence showing that, like, you know, and it doesn't have to be good counter evidence, that, like, you know, there's variation across, you know, the centuries with the Earth's fluctuation in climate, thank you, and in temperature. And so that's an example for the political questions. And then for the apolitical ones, they also showed them, so they would ask, you know, on a scale from 1 to 7, how confident are you that Thomas Edison invented the light bulb? And for the people who said 6 or 7, they presented them with counter evidence showing that, like, well, actually it was Nikola Tesla who invented the incandescent filament, and that's really what the light bulb is. And right, so all this counter evidence, and they scanned their brains, and then they asked them to self-report their confidence on the same questions after receiving the counter evidence. And as you might expect, for politicized questions, people changed their mind less than apolitical questions. But interestingly, also, there were 2 areas in their brain that were like massively more activated on political questions, and those areas were related to self-identification and emotional reasoning for political questions as opposed to apolitical questions. And so, sorry, that was long-winded, but like, so that study, because yeah, it's a normally functioning brain, and you would presumably own a mechanism of a normally functioning brain. Like I don't think any of us are under the assumptions that we wouldn't fail that test too, essentially, right? However, it seems like that condition is almost failing some like moderate reasons responsive
requirement
condition. Yeah. And I think that, yeah, I don't know. So knowing that information, then when someone is presented with political counter evidence, they don't change their mind. then that is sort of an undermining. I do get the undermining intuition there, even though it is a normally functioning brain. And I wonder if that intuition is resting on a deeper intuition that whatever process you're using to form beliefs or change beliefs has to be moderately reasons responsive in the way Fisher says.
Yeah, I mean, I'm like, when thinking about that, there just seems to be this just discontinuity where there are moments when you could assess someone as reasons responsive or moderately reasons responsive, but then there are moments where, whether it's for emotional reasons, and I think that would classify as an emotional reason. I know very little about the brain, but like when I don't. But when it comes to something like a political question, yeah, sure. Like I think whatever those sections that were activated, like you said, just what was it like? It
was the amygdala and
identification,
prefrontal cortex, I think. Yeah,
the amygdala and the whatever one you said there. I mean, I don't know the brain. You do. But
no. I
know you've studied it a little bit, but
a little is the right word there. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, we pointed to other examples where there are just emotional overrides that you would no longer call someone reasons responsive in that moment.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's just generally a fault of the, conception of, reasons responsiveness, where it's like, how does emotion play into this? Like, how is someone reasons responsive when they're sufficiently emotional?
Yeah. And it seems like at least our intuitions are no.
Yeah.
Oh shoot, Brian might be kind of spotty here.
Giffin, what are your thoughts on this here?
This being what? Are we backing up to like Jordan's original statement, or like what you were just addressing?
Just generally like the failing of reasons responsive or moderate reasons responsiveness here. And
yeah, it definitely tugs on intuitions, right? Like, I mean, the fact that this is both like a time, differentiated factor, and also just like a with respect to certain subject, as like the study seemed to describe, kind of factor. So the same person in the same kind of testing chamber seems to be possibly reasons responsive in one question, then not in the next, then again with like the third question, just based on the subject matter.
Yeah.
Like, is that person in total reasons responsive, or do you need to contextualize each individual assessment of reasons responsiveness? But also, whenever you kind of consider that, like if motion is involved, if they become not reasons responsive, or do they lack their kind of responsibility? Like, passionate murder feels like that. Those are the things that we might want to hold people responsible for, especially if like it was very specific to that kind of moment or subject that invoked like the emotions. Like in total, you can say like they were reasons responsive before and after, just like a very thin moment. Where like the reasons responsiveness, like you might claim, kind of went away, but like they seem kind of normal. Maybe even during the act, it might be indistinguishable. So I don't know. It's really tugs on intuitions.
That example you gave, though, is I think like the absolute beauty of Green and Cohen's conclusion, where they say that and I think there's like they're being a little bit general, because obviously they're two I know Greene. I think chiefly they're psychologists. I know Greene has like philosophy in his background too, but like they have that. It's towards the end of the paper. They have that phrase, some type of moral responsibility can remain. And the example that you give is a perfect example of why, for purposes of the law, I think retribution serves no role, because for that example, it purely comes down to just objective, as in the objective attitude, like things that we can reasonably believe about that person. Like if we think that he is prone to become emotional like that in the future, then that's a good reason to jail him, right? That's not a good reason to punitively jail him, just like really make him suffer in jail. But it's like
just consequentially,
quarantine.
You can imagine like an investigation of his psyche is like, this must have been like like he had enormous barriers to even any minuscule amount of violence, but just like the circumstances kind of all conspired in a perfect storm to like, barely hop that barrier into like, his actions. It's like that person may be like the least prone to violence on earth, just like the circumstances were so overwhelming. You can imagine that kind of situations, like he will never commit violence again with a very high probability. Like what purpose does like putting him away for 15 years serve?
It's why I love Wolf's phrase about like the world has to conspire in your favor. Like it's so true. Like the world has to conspire in your favor for all of these things. Like
it's a humbling perspective, really.
Yeah, dude. Like the world didn't conspire in that guy's favor, and if like he'd sorry, I have like a weird half sneeze coming up.
Bless you.
that is torturous.
Just being edged by a sneeze.
Dude.
Giffin, have you noticed a difference about me during this this podcast here?
What are you alluding to?
He's now reasons responsive.
I've emerged from the dark.
I would actually
stage during like the past week.
Actually, it would be more accurate right now to call me less reasons responsive.
What are you under the influence of, Adam?
It's actually the opposite. I gave up nicotine, and
impossible. Surely you mean a certain form of nicotine, but another more aggressive form has replaced it.
Well, no, but it's.
Yes.
It's honestly the worst. It's one of the worst feelings I've ever felt in my life.
You're suffering from withdrawal right now, basically.
It's terrible because like there's so many different factors involved. Like one, this would be like a quick just interlude here, but I have to tell them because
we're going to cut the podcast down just to this anecdote.
One, your IQ drops like 6 to 7 points during this withdrawal period. It's a fact because here's the thing, like
crazy.
Adam dropped just barely below reason's responsiveness just now. 7 points were the only barrier.
It's genuinely true because the thing is like.
No, I believe you. That's actually kind of absurd.
My concentration is so split. It's so split. Like it's terrible. It's terrible.
I know exactly what you mean.
So that's one. And another is like I can feel it in my teeth. There's like this like gnawing sensation through my mouth, my gums, my teeth, and I
honestly didn't know that there was that kind of like mechanical response like in your physiology. I had no idea,
dude.
It's terrible, and it feels like I can't even describe what it feels like at the center of my brain. I think it would be just like if I had to like even just drop an analogy, it would be like not eating for 2 days, and then being seated at a table and being like presented with your favorite meal, but you may not touch it. Like Jesus. It's.
When did this start? Like, have you been suffering for days on end, or is this like a it's 21st of October pact you made with yourself?
No, this was like, I don't know.
This was about 2 weeks ago.
Holy shit, you're feeling that bad after 2 weeks?
Yeah. Yeah,
God.
Well, because the thing is, like, I've had to sort of like wean myself off of it because the thing is, I
no hard stops.
I quit cold turkey immediately, but then I was just like
sweating.
I couldn't function. I literally could not like, engage in typical brain function. But now I've finally diminished myself at this point to like nearly nothing, and I'm about to lose my mind. All right, but like,
the mind will return. I appreciate that anecdote.
I know, but I'll sorry.
I'll keep that in mind when I make judgments during the rest of this call.
No, I'm sorry for this, but I had to explain myself because I'm like twitchy as shit over here right now. So
no problem.
I was gonna say the difference I noticed was that I can see you clearly, not through the cloud.
Well,
the fog machine is broke down.
Even in a deterministic world, I am still fit for ridicule.
I'll be damned if any determinism is going to take away ridicule.
Yeah, I'm a compatibilist about ridicule and determinism.
Yeah,
the strongest kind of compatibilist.
Not quite a reactive attitude. So
nothing but objective attitude from here on out, Adam. I hear you loud and clear.
Yeah.
returning to my overall question we were kind of talking about, I almost wonder it'd be kind of if these studies haven't been done, these would be really cool interdisciplinary studies to see exactly how well people's intuitions track what we would think, or like what I would think given a more fleshed out like view of this, are the right intuitions to have.
Jordan, this is a random question that just popped in my mind, but did that study that you were referencing involve like any juveniles? Like, was there a comparative force there between juveniles and adults? Because that sounds super interesting to me right now.
Almost certainly not. Almost certainly.
I was going to say, you probably would have mentioned it, because that, like, it almost sounds like I don't know if I'm going to say scientific basis, but like that almost sounds like a test you could do to see how like developed the child is. Like, is his reasons responsiveness like kind of, or lack thereof, subject? Like,
you were asking
political questions.
You asked me for the Harris Cohen study.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. 100% not. It was just all adults. Yeah.
I think that might be that hasn't been done already. I have no idea.
I'm sure it hasn't. Well, because I think it's hard to do stuff with juveniles. Yeah.
I work in pediatrics. It is certainly harder to do things with juveniles. There's no really consent.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just
I'm going to quote that out of context. So often.
I look forward to being canceled.
Quote from Giffin: "It's hard to do things with juveniles. There is no consent."
Check what's trending on Twitter in 3 days. Let's just say that.
Noted. No, actually, though, Jordan, your intuition is 100% correct there.
What was my intuition?
Oh, that like it's hard to get like work with juveniles.
Yeah. I wonder. So like, I think it would be super cool to do. You'd almost have to do maybe a set of studies where this was going back not to the Harris Cohen study that I was talking about, but the study that I think that I know exists, but not really, where people's intuitions were tested on like, to use Wolf's locution, whether people were determined in the right way or not.
Oh yeah, sorry, I was referencing the Harris Cohen one.
But I mean, that's a good one too. And yeah, like I think it would be, I don't know, it'd be really cool to see, because you wouldn't want to commit the naturalistic fallacy in doing those studies and just say that whatever people's intuitions are, if they track some pattern, were the right thing. But it would be cool to see whether people's intuitions would align with kind of like a Fisher mechanism ownership and reasons responsive. You know what I mean?
There's a lot of different parameters you can kind of check with that kind of a study. Like you can check like kind of between like cultures too. Like, the fact that this is concerning like law, and is, he discusses like the fact that the intuitions of people are important in kind of like the conversation.
Yeah,
that might be different between cultures.
Yeah, that is,
and that's influence and like have practical influence. Therefore,
yeah, you made me think. Like I had a little note in the margin I wrote down. Like like they actually make a good point where they talk about how intuitions are important for the law, because like they're right. There is no platonic form of the law, right? Like it does come down to sort of our intuitions and what kind of society we want to create with it. Like there is no deontological right law. Kantians, email me if you want to like quibble about that. But like on my assumption, there is no such thing as that.
Put your questions in the chat.
Do you think retributivism makes sense, given that most people have the intuition for retributive justice, in the sense that the law as it is now serves the intuitions of the people at large?
Very good question. I know exactly.
Do you know what I mean by that?
Great question.
Yeah.
I say no, and a hard no. But
really,
yeah.
I mean, it's an automatic hard no, that if we have a legal system that doesn't align with how most people view justice being served, that's an immediate no.
Consequentially, that sounds like it's disruptive. Oh, sorry, Brian. Please.
I think I'm just dealing with a delay right now. It's all good. I don't think viewing. I guess I don't see. Just because the average person views the legal system in a certain way doesn't mean we should entirely subscribe to that, right? Because I mean, then we're just. I mean, here's what I'd say. If there was like, we did it in this 2-step process where it's just like, we start teaching this in education more broadly to kind of transition into a future where that's possible, that might be a more elegant solution than just saying, hey, let's make this transition.
Well, but I think it's important, when viewing this though, like keep in mind, as it's said in the paper here, it's not just when we say like the average person here, we're not talking about average intelligence. We're talking about, people, all across society, often highly intelligent.
The vast majority of people, yeah.
The vast majority of people have a very different conception
Right.
of a justice that our legal system serves. So if there are a select few people who, I'm not saying this would be right, obviously, that like retributivism is a poor model to operate under, and that a consequentialist perspective in model is just a preferable one. But I'm just wondering, like, most people's sense of justice would not be
conserved,
not be served at that point.
Or with like the two-step process of like, I'm not saying that we shouldn't, like, I think we all agree that the consequentialist way is the more correct way objectively, without regard to like social impacts, which I think that's what you're alluding. But if we were to, I think that is not. I think you at one point said that's just like, this is the average person is not. No notion of it. That's not talking about intelligence, not IQ. And I wasn't either. I was talking about, because I think with education, it's about promoting different ways of thinking, and so if you promote a different way of thinking, then you can transition into like that. More objective approach to law.
Oh, I agree with you. I'm not against actually influencing people's intuitions such that they align with ours, like regarding consequentialism and the rejection of retributivism. But I'm just saying, as it currently stands, most people don't have that intuition in adopting a legal system predicated on rejecting retributivism. I in theory it sounds nice, but like I just like, I wonder what the fallout is. You may say like, okay, but that is kind of built into the consequentialist point of view at that, but that's kind of my question, right? Like what is the fallout when you've got a society that doesn't actually like share the same sense of justice?
I almost have this suspicion that people, because it's like, okay, so people totally have this impulse and desire for revenge, right? And that's like at the basis of retributivism. Honestly, though, I kind of wonder if that's like this is like a John Stuart Mill point, but like, I wonder if their more like rationally enlightened selves actually wouldn't think that. Like if they were able to sample both experiences, like the experience of wanting and getting revenge versus we're talking purely legal here, you know what I mean? Taking the objective attitude and just being able to actually view someone as unfortunately determined, like the world didn't cooperate. I don't know, like doesn't it seem in a legal sense that obviously even that same person, just that both versions of him, he'd be better off if he saw it in the consequentialist non-desert framework, right? So like that, I don't know, because you're totally right. Like if the law just switched right now, I think people would have like a certain sort of suffering, but without being able to put it more sophisticated in a more sophisticated manner than this, it's almost like the wrong type of suffering. Like it's a type of suffering that they ought not experience.
What are you referring to? I'm sorry. I think I got lost at the end.
The suffering of lack of people in the legal system who have been wronged and like want revenge.
Okay.
Yeah. It's almost like they like, I grant that they do want desert, but they're wrong to want desert. And I think they'd actually be happier if they didn't desire desert.
That's kind of suffering.
Yeah, I mean that's true, but it's just like we're talking about like a change in the legal system and how people would respond, and without their intuition being changed, their intuition's changing. So I'm talking about like think of like something like the Chauvin trial. Right.
Oh, institutional support.
That's a good
collapse.
example because it pulls our intuitions. Like I do feel the retributive impulse towards that guy. Yeah.
And also you know, like an entire country, you know what I mean? So I'm not saying that people wouldn't view that differently given a different legal system, right? Because people would view it. I mean, we don't know the counterfactual entirely, but I'm just saying like obviously people would view it differently, but I just wonder what the country's reaction at large would be if they didn't share our intuitions. So
wait, Giffin, real quick. I guess my problem, it's not a problem, but like my follow-up question is because the problem is that we're assuming on a consequentialist basis, it would look different. Like what did he get? 25 years in prison or something? I can't remember.
Yeah.
Okay, but for real, on a consequential, so like the problem is we need to know like all the details of him and the case and everything like this. Like this is a problem with consequentialism is that you need to know a lot of details, right? Like deontology is easy. He did deserve it or not, right? But like if it came out of the wash, I don't know. Like it seems completely plausible that the outcome is consequentially justified for him to be locked away for like 25 years or whatever. Well, do you know what I mean?
I feel like Adam's claim, Adam, correct me if I'm wrong, was more about like not within a kind of certain trial or, you know, case, but rather like if the Supreme Court like came out and said like, hey, we're going to like our interpretation of like the laws, like the system of laws we have is going to be non-retributive and like just basically let's put out a brief statement, kind of like this paper explaining, you know, what the purpose of the law is. I think people would just react very
poorly.
I mean, there would be a huge kind of like gut punches and like defensive behavior, and I mean, it would destroy in the institutional integrity. So from a consequentialist frame of view, I'm imagining like, if that's your question, Adam, like what if we just change that now where everyone's intuitions are not aligned with kind of, you know, ours? The institutional support would just collapse, and then the consequences of having a system of laws where not only at that point you're beyond like whether the system of laws should be retributive or consequentialist. You don't have that system to begin with. You don't have the capacity to make that kind of question. So I don't know if
Giffin, I think you got it right in the sense that I do believe I agree with everything you said there, and I also just want to reiterate, I think that would be the ultimate goal, to reject retributivism, but at the same time, get people's intuitions to change first. But Jordan, I do want to respond to what you said too, because I also think like, I don't know. I mean, this is gonna be entirely just like this is subjective at this point, but I almost feel like what you just said there was like almost like I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I got a sense that there was almost like a sacrificing of Chauvin at the altar in a sense, that for the 25 years, because I think the 25 years could be justified in a retributive model where it's like, okay, like it's not purely consequential in the sense that he's, you know, this is some sort of deterrence, or he's more, you know, this gives us some insight into his character. Therefore, he's likely to do this again. Therefore, 25 years in prison. Yeah, but I don't think you could justify that for 25 years in prison.
Well, I think you can justify life in prison on a consequentialist basis. Like if it's for purely quarantine. Yes,
correct. But that's not. But that wasn't the driving force behind his sentence.
Oh, totally. But I'm just saying. Yeah. So I was just saying that like the outcome can look the same in very certain cases, and like the problem is I just don't know enough of the details about like the Chauvin case to know if that would be a case wherein it would look the same in both like schemas or not. Do you know? Yeah, I made the point poorly.
But I think the reason I brought it up was because I'm arguing it wouldn't look the same.
Oh, in that particular case, it might not. Yeah.
Because I think that's why it makes it interesting. It's not that it would appear the same either way, and therefore people at large would be satisfied. I'm saying that, like, I feel like, you know, 25 years. I mean,
you're making
I'm not saying
you're pulling at our intuitions towards a lesser sentence if we take away the retributivism. Is that what you're trying to like get at?
Totally.
Yeah. And that's a really good one.
Well, I'll meet you there. Like I think that now I don't know, but it's plausible that consequentially, all that needed to be done there was like strip the guy of his badge, like just allow him not to hurt anyone again.
Yeah, let him work in like kind of a mall or something, right?
Yeah, but you know, so you say, okay, but that has no deterrent factor, and there's good reason to believe that this is a great case in which to highlight a deterrent factor. Okay, throw on 5 years then, or like whatever. You know, there's going to be there's going to be, you know, weeks, months of actual investigation into what sentence it will be and in how is it kind of laid out, right? But I'm
Yeah, where it gets very
I'll
tricky.
grant you, yeah, I'll meet you at, you know, at any point in the spectrum you want to meet there.
But what if like
Which people get mad about that. Like people get mad about me even saying that. Like people I'm sure listening will feel that retributive impulse, like what, he deserves more than that. And it's like, well, he doesn't deserve.
Does society deserve like the negative repercussions of that decision though?
It might, yeah, exactly. It might, exactly. Like it might be a good thing for him to get more time, but he doesn't deserve more time.
Yeah. So I think that's another strange thing that was brought up in the paper here. I mean, it's just like from like a consequentialist framework here. I mean, like even what you just said there. So could it benefit society at large if he were to get the 25 years, even if, you know, like maybe consequentially for, you know, in terms of like the direct sphere of who he personally can influence, it wouldn't make sense to give him 25 years, but, you know, but kind of viewing his case in society at large, it actually
you're tweaking the magistrate and the mob moral.
Yes.
You're tweaking that.
It's more than just for him specifically. You need to really look at, I mean, that eventually will, you know, be informed by people's intuitions too. So I mean, the consequentialism folds that in. But
this is I was just saying, like we're really edging into just like straight up ethics here. We're like, because I think Adam's laying out a position that I agree with, which is sort of a pragmatic, non-cognitivist, moral realist view of like the situation here, and like that we'll totally do like a series on ethics. But no, like I think the interim period is the sketchiest period in this project. You know what I mean? Is like
society is stratified between like viewpoints.
Yeah,
I think intuitions, I guess.
Yeah, I wonder if that's like the sketchiest point in this whole project that Green and Cohen are putting forth, right? Because like, I don't know, dude. It seems like, because it seems like obviously the system that we currently have is poor. It's just so poor. Do you know what I mean?
Sure.
Yeah. When was this paper written?
2004.
Okay.
2004. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's still relevant. So that's not a good
all
sign.
too relevant. Yeah, it's all too relevant. Well, so I had a tangential question, but if people wanted to stay on this point for a second more, I'll hold it.
I will go. Giffin, go ahead.
I was just gonna. I mean, I don't know if it's quite tangential. It seems to be kind of following from what we were just discussing. I was just curious what your guys' reactions were to like the points that the authors bring up in terms of like the rebuttals against like the pure consequentialism, right? Like it may be the case that it might justify extreme over punishing, or even like a just purely consequentially in a broad sense, like a punishment for people who, you know, maybe did nothing wrong, but like the fact of the trial would, you know, be a positive force for society at large. And like the counterpoints that they bring up about deceptive practices being like impractical, or in like I'm curious where you guys were pulled in that example. But if Jordan, if you had a more relevant one. Brian,
go ahead, Brian.
I think consequentialism is kind of just shrouded, at least for me, in this kind of weird, like it feels like it all depends on how you define the best common good. And I think through that definition, I'm not sure definitively what the best action would be in every single scenario. So it almost always tends to just like mesh into this whatever is the most like, or so often is like whatever is like the most common sense thing to do. So I don't know, what are your thoughts on that? Or just like consequentialism, what to do in each situation is like hard to define.
Well, I think for me, and I think I speak for pretty much everyone on this podcast, it's like we all kind of have like consequentialist like tendencies when like assessing these situations. But at the same time, like, I mean, I'm not speaking for Jordan in this sense, but like there are definitely issues to consequentialism, but I think there are probably just more sophisticated models of viewing consequentialism, like just more sophisticated.
Why isn't that
Um,
speaking for me? For me, I agree with that.
no, because you already have one.
Oh,
Like you've
oh,
already because you
oh,
probably
okay.
are. I'm sure you've read papers on
Yeah,
consequentialism.
yeah, yeah.
We
Okay.
never have.
Hmm.
So like it does like pull at my intuitions, but I just don't have
Yeah.
because I mean you I
Where was
could
the
assess.
strongest example where it pulled your intuition? I'm curious.
I think with the one we just talked about where
It's
it's
a good one.
the over punishing.
Hmm.
Like I buy that immediately as a weakness to consequentialism, where would it benefit society at large if Chauvin was given 50 years in prison? Like, and if let's say for the thought experiment that it
Was he
genuinely
executed
did,
like on live television? Yeah.
Yeah,
You can
it-
push the
Blow
envelope.
open the
Yeah.
doors of the Supreme Court, execute him right there.
I mean,
what are the consequences?
Because we could definitely kind of just like curtail the boundaries, like in this thought experiment and say, okay, this doesn't speak to the society at large. Like this isn't like now a society that people are afraid they're going to be overpunished. Like people recognize that this is like an isolated case and that this is like a symbolic, action here taken. And you can make it very specific, and yet you still look at that situation and think that there was a grave miscarriage of justice there. And I want to see if there are more sophisticated models of consequentialism that will actually kind of like tackle over punishment.
Yeah.
So,
Pete, we will definitely do. There's act and rule consequentialism, and Peter Railton has this type of consequentialism that I'm really drawn to called sophisticated consequentialism. So we'll do like a series on that. But Brian, your question is pointing to another famous like thought experiment in consequentialist reasoning called the 3 Mile Island problem, where the Chernobyl meltdown. It's sort of like, okay, on the surface, that seems like it was obviously a bad thing. But if you tweak the subsequent consequences of that enough, it can actually look like a good thing. Where if you say, it could like this, both accounts of this are plausible. Like that disaster actually will be like a motivating factor in getting nuclear energy to the point where it is safeguarded enough that we do actually trust and we do actually use it. In which case it begins to look like the 3 Mile Island incident was actually a good thing. Or it could turn out that the notoriety of that, people knowing about Chernobyl influences the lay people's intuition so much that people continually vote against nuclear energy being like a green substitute for coal and like fossil fuels. So yeah, like that's just to say that like this is a really good it's a good thing to keep in mind from when we do the ethics. But for this, I don't know. I mean, sorry, I lost track a little bit of what we were talking about. Oh, honestly, for the purposes of this, the consequentialist punishment, I generally bought their retorts, generally speaking.
Was there any instances where you didn't, or you thought they were weaker?
So the problem is honestly, I haven't thought about all of this a lot because I think like the first main move that you have to get clear on is whether you do switch to a consequentialist basis or not, right? Because then a lot of the problem is like once you because the biggest problem that they point out in this paper, and unfortunately nearly 20 years later it's still true, is we don't have this basis. You know what I mean? Because even if we go wrong on that basis pretty frequently, it's still going to be so much better than the retributive basis we have now, right? So like this sounds a little cold-hearted, but like I am okay with a little bit of collateral damage in the sense of getting things wrong if we were to switch. to a because
when you say getting things wrong, are you referring to just like the over punishment tweaking?
Or under, you can imagine we'll weigh
okay.
on the under punishments too. We'll fail to punish someone in a way that doesn't.
I wasn't sure if
know?
you were referring to like just inaccurate results or if you were referring to like false convictions having positive effects, because that was mentioned in the first couple pages.
That's a big can of worms.
No,
yeah.
that was. I read that, I was like, that's a big yikes.
To be honest,
that really,
to be honest, that actually has way more to do with straight up consequentialism than moral responsibility. So I almost want to kind of hold off on that question.
Totally fair. Yeah, no, that definitely piqued my interest though, because once that was brought up and the authors like addressed it, kind of, he's like, that's kind of unrealistic. I was like, is it?
But to be fair to the authors, that isn't really in the scope of this paper. So like,
I'm not blaming them. But
yeah.
amongst like their rebuttals to like the critical points that they brought up, which is good that they brought them up to address, that one was like, like that one stayed with me from page 2 to the end.
Yeah, it's a really good. I mean, there's a lot of really good questions in consequentialism, and honestly, I know less about it than moral responsibility, but The question that I had for you guys is on it. It's honestly related to a lot of what we've already been talking about, but there's a question that stuck out for me throughout the paper too, and it's almost and again, it's larger than the paper, but we can look at one specific instance of it that shows up in the paper. So Green and Cohen kind of point out that this lay intuition that people have, this pre-philosophical notion, is wrong. Right, essentially. Let's angry libertarians email me again, right? But like, we don't have contra causal free will, right? But people think that we do, or they have, like, people think that we're only a source of action, never a result of action, you might say, right? And then this is kind of the duality of the title, right? So they say theoretically, actually, these knowing more and more that the brain is the source of our actions, and neuroscience showing us that theoretically should have nothing to do with the law, because it should have never hinged on that in the first place, right? However, they point out that empirically speaking, people's intuitions do change. Excuse me, when you present cases of like, the tumor or the brain device or whatever, right? So here's my question. And I genuinely don't know what I think about this. People are starting off with the wrong views, and we're trying to move them to less wrong views. But it seems like we're doing that when we use these intuition pumps. We're doing that in a way that's not theoretically upstanding, in that it actually shouldn't matter. Like, how do I want to phrase this? I'm trying to kind of motion at something that I don't have fully worked out in my head here, but like, okay. So like the lay intuitions, people don't believe the right thing in the first place, right? And we're trying to move them towards believing less of the wrong things, right? Yeah. Getting them closer and closer to the non-retributivist basis. And we can kind of, I don't want to say trick, but we can get their intuitions to change by showing them all these cases. Oh, look at this, like, don't you know that when this happens, it's due to like this correlation in the brain? And people are like, wow, okay, that actually, I didn't know that, and that changes. But that information shouldn't be the thing that's getting their mind to change, because it should have never been that in the first place. So I don't know.
It's like, oh no, I see what you're saying. Like, as you're getting them to change, you're also kind of getting them closer and closer to recognizing that it shouldn't matter.
Yeah, but it's also like there. It's like there's this weird kind of like Kantian impulse I have that like, not only should people believe the right things, but they should believe them for the right reasons. Do you know what I mean? And so like, when we're kind of getting people's intuitions to be pumped in these ways, it doesn't seem like we're really getting them to believe the right things for the right reasons. They're believing more towards the right things. I don't know. Does that concern ring true to you guys at all? This actually comes down to like cases of manipulation versus persuasion, like, but
are you concerned with the consequences of like the one versus the other?
Yes. But honestly, I also have a little bit of like I think I have an aesthetic objection to it, but I think it would get cashed out in consequences, right? Like, it's not actually getting these people to reason in a epistemically robust way.
It suggests further problems down the line may occur.
We should definitely do an episode on evolutionary debunking arguments, because this is like kind of it's the same thing there. Yeah, right. Like, it's like this is kind of a debunking argument that Green and Cohen are making in a way, right? Like they're saying you thought that people were merely sources, not results, but actually we can show you that people are results, but in a way that shouldn't matter, because like responsibility doesn't hinge on people being results. Like all of us know that, you know what I mean? Like, of course there is some brain activity associated with anything like that. Like the real finding would be if no brain activity correlated with some change, you know, like in a mental state.
An awful finding. Just deep in a lab, you're looking at just like
you've proved
triplicate data.
Yes, like that is
the brain has none of things are firing just completely absurdly randomly.
So like you guys might not be aware of these, but there are a ton of these papers published in social psych and cognitive psych and in experimental philosophy sometimes, where you'll catch in the GD, the general discussion, people always say these like very, very naive things. Like I remember there was one where there was like a behavior change, and in the general discussion they were like, and we actually showed that there was a change in the brain associated with this, you know, change. And everyone's like, wow, you know, it actually changes your brain. It was a paper on meditation, actually. They were like, you know, meditation actually changes your brain. And it's like, of course it does. The real finding is if it didn't change your brain. Do you know what I mean? Like, so that seems to be a fallacious debunking argument when it's applied here, even though the conclusion is correct. I don't know. I just had like this weird kind of like little, like, it was like a little qualm that stuck with me throughout the paper. But here's why it's a tension for me. Cohen and Greene are totally right that people's minds don't get changed by the merely philosophical argumentation. Like, because people are bad reasoners. Like, you know what I mean? People will stick to it. I don't know. Like, I don't.
With the gut.
Yeah. I side with
retributivism all the way.
It's retributivism all the way down. I don't know. Like, are you at least catching? I don't have like a therefore of that, but do you catch that weird tension there too?
I think. Yeah. No. I agree. It's underhanded. Like. Yeah, I mean, we're changing their intuitions on.
Yeah, in a way that we shouldn't be.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's like, I think if they were to do a little more than that, though, and like if we really understood, like neurochemistry, say, right, and we were able to like map pretty much like the particles that enter your brain and how they interact.
That was presented in the paper. Like you can watch like a live feed. You know, of every
your brain,
every neuron, every neurotransmitter firing, everything.
Yeah, I think that's fine then to change people's intuitions that way. Then, right? I mean, that would just indicate you were not an uncaused causer, right?
Ultimately. It would break down, poor intuitions. But I think what Jordan was alluding to is like maybe it's not a full enlightenment that's happening, right?
And it's also like. Well, because if you and I are presented with that, I'm just going to be like, well, yeah, of course, everything is determined in my brain. Like, I'm not concerned, because that almost seems like it goes back to the Wolf paper a little bit. Like when you just show people, like we've mapped the brain, that's pretty close to trotting out the thesis of determinism generally. Whereas, what I would be more concerned about are specific instances of being determined in the wrong way, right? Like, so not a proper brain functioning, but like a proper brain functioning plus a brain tumor. Then, oh, wow, okay, so like we have good reason to believe that caused this action, right? So like this person wasn't responsible for that act.
You brought that back to like mechanism ownership, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So it's almost like we're using that intuition that Wolf kind of undercuts, where we're almost we're showing people individual instances of the truth of determinism generally, but it's like, but it really shouldn't hinge on that. But I'm not disputing Green and Cohen's empirical, like they're right. Like empirically, that is what changes people's minds.
Yeah. Once we get into discussions of law, it's very, very
We'd be like
different. We talk about society. Yeah.
Yes.
Because
Because
the consequentialist leads to darker paths.
you know what it might come. I mean, honestly, it might be a very internally answerable question. It might be morally permissible to do that when in fact you would otherwise have to regress into like the objective attitude. like this person's not reasons responsive in the right way. Therefore, it might be morally permissible to kind of intuition pump them in this way. I don't know. So people aren't getting that retributivism doesn't make any sense on merely or purely philosophical reasoning. So let's throw a little neuroscience in there. Let's throw a little cognitive psych in there. I don't know. What do you think about that? Because without doing that, we would have to merely manage these people. But managing them, I guess, could take the form of this managing. I don't know. It's like a very slippery conclusion you come to.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean,
I don't know.
I mean, it's definitely underhanded either way.
Oh, for sure.
So,
I'm wondering if some underhandedness could be permissible.
Consequentially.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, a lot can be permitted consequentially if you can find some very niche examples. That I think would be a great point of discussion.
Yeah.
Adam, I loved your example of the Giffin case. That was great to bring up.
No, well, thank you.
Oh shoot. Damn.
Everything okay, Jordan?
Yeah. Oh, I totally lost this, but you guys had made me think about actually there was like a kind of related point that like I was thinking about this question with respect to something else too, and I actually might cut this because I gotta figure out if this paper has been written or not. But there's also this question of it's the same question with respect to this stuff, but with respect to religion. So you know how like you can pluck Bible verses to get almost anything you want to. The Bible is like a schizophrenic text, right?
Sure.
Well, I was thinking about this a lot actually, and because it touches consequentialism and the objective attitude, moral responsibility, and like religion. It's just like a cool idea to think about. There's the same problem here, wherein you're doing sort of a fallacious genealogical debunking with respect to like getting evangelical Christians to become moderate Christians. Whenever okay, for instance, you encounter like an evangelical Christian on, picketing some like anti-gay protest or whatever, right? Well, I guess they wouldn't be picketing an anti-gay they're like in the anti-gay protest, right? And so okay, so you take the objective attitude, this person's obviously not reasons responsive in the right way, right? You go up to them and instead of actually trying to convince them that God isn't real, or at least that their specific religion is wrong, you try to attenuate their views. So you quote verses from the Bible, Jesus saying, love every brother in Christ or whatever, and treat everyone equally under the law, trying to get people to like argue like that gay marriage should be legal, right? But you're doing something that is consequentially good because let's say you do actually move these people, but you're doing it disingenuously because you can also pull from Leviticus and Deuteronomy, stone he who is a homosexual, right? So it's like, I don't know. I was just like, it's something I've been kind of thinking about, and I might be coming down on the conclusion that any case in which the objective attitude is like we would be morally permitted to take that is a case in which this could be a form of the objective attitude. I don't know. I just thought there was like a very interesting case that relates to this.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely dishonesty in there, and I don't know how. I mean, like, it just relates to how does dishonesty like
come out ethically?
Exactly.
The consequentialism argument is going to be a must at some point.
Oh,
yeah, it works so well for like crazy thought experiments. Like, how dark are you willing to take this?
Yeah, it does seem pretty incomplete.
I know. But it also seems like way the
better.
Best.
Yeah. I mean, maybe consequentialism needs like a little bit of a frame, but it's going to be the painting nonetheless.
Yeah, I would love to do a mini series on ethics because I've got some views that I've like kind of worked through in like my undergrad stuff, but obviously like some grad work to be done for sure. Okay, sorry, return to the paper. Did we have any outstanding main questions with it? I think that question specifically was one that I know that I had. I might just skim the margins.
I'm doing the same.
Yeah, because they point out that retributivism hung on a bad thread in the first place, which was related to my question. Oh, yeah. Well, okay. So, I'll mention it since I'd forgotten actually, Adam, this was kind of a question that you were asking about. So this is in section 2 where they're talking about consequentialism and retributivism. And they were talking about, I'll just quote them. One problem is that of draconian penalties. It is possible, for example, that imposing the death penalty for parking violations would maximize aggregate welfare by reducing parking violations to near zero. But retributivists claim whether or not this is a good idea does not depend on the balance of costs and benefits. It is simply wrong to kill someone for double parking. And my response to that is like, okay, to the retributivist there, it's like, I actually don't know how you arrive at the principle it is simply wrong to kill someone for double parking without respect to consequences.
That sounds very in line with what a retributist would say in terms of like, that sounds like a retributist position where it's like you've done this wrong thing, now you deserve retribution, and the scale of the retribution is really up to the given retributist.
Yeah, and it also they're kind of talking about the contrapositive there, where you are not deserving of the death penalty merely for double parking, and that's almost like kind of they're viewing it as like a deontological duty. But like my response to the deontologist there is like, okay, how do you derive that principle like a priori without respect to consequences?
Yeah, I mean, just a counterexample to that would be like, consequentially, what if that, prevented like 10 billion deaths somehow, through some absurd, machinery at place.
Well, yeah, so that's another point too, but I was even making a different point. It's like in forming and kind of excavating that moral principle, I don't know how you do that a priori without respect to the consequences.
Right?
Yeah. So it's like
it's definitely an intuition.
Yeah.
But
like I'm
just an intuition.
I'm gonna cut this too, but I wrote a paper in college that I want to revisit in like after I'm done applying and stuff. But I argued that and I don't know, maybe some form of this paper I'm sure it's been written, but like you guys are kind of generally aware of like Kantian moral philosophy. It's like deontological rules, essentially. It was kind of a genealogical debunking like argument I had in a paper, but like I was arguing the only reason why people believe that at all is because following those rules does tend to produce good consequences. And if they didn't, no one would actually believe those rules, but they're mistaken about the basis on which they believe them. It's not like this a priori armchair.
Sounds about right.
Yeah, it's because those, but I'll cut that too. Yeah, but that was one thing in the paper that I did think was worth kind of responding to, because Cohen and Greene don't address that. They kind of and this isn't a critique, but they almost like chase the retributivist down the rabbit hole. They're like, and okay, granting that this is the only way to like buttress this, how would you respond? And I'm just saying, I don't even know how the retributivist or deontologist in this this example, I don't even know how they get to that principle without respect to the consequences. But this is all grounds for a mini series on ethics. Wow, that probably won't be a mini series, but okay. Anything else with the paper?
I mean, I guess just one final thing is just, I didn't like the fact that they said, they gave this paragraph early in the paper, the standard consequentialist response to these charges is that such concerns have no place in the real world. But then they kind of like agree with that at the end of the paper, but it's just not true. Like, I mean, you can actually look to countries like Singapore, right, where they do have the death penalty. Like, they do hang people there.
Adam, I literally wrote Singapore on my paper. I'm not even joking.
For like very, very minor,
chew bubble gum.
Yes, I know their maximum like penalties for chewing bubble gum, or if you're caught with drugs, that could be life in prison or death.
Wow.
And have you seen how fast they've modernized? And I've met people from Singapore and talked with them, and they fully support it.
Adam, I'm so glad you brought that up.
That's
I've
crazy.
underlined
Yes.
every single time in this paper. I mean, it's very subtle, but like in that part 2, like the same page we were looking at just now, it says, likewise, a legal system that deliberately convicted innocent people and or secretly refrained from punishing guilty ones would require a kind of systematic deception that would lead inevitably to corruption and that would never survive in a free society. But they kind of leave hanging the point, what about in an unfree society? We have examples of those, like it's very Western centric, which is why I thought the cultural angle would be interesting as well. Because I mean, I literally wrote down Singapore to this exact point, Adam. I was like, what about bubble gum? Like
exactly, because they've responded to me. You know, like have you seen what we've built like in the last 30 years? And like, there's no denying it, right? Like you look at Singapore,
dark consequentialism,
and it's just like, and it's like, okay, once again, it just seems like evaluating the consequences and like this isn't this is an obvious claim, but it's just in the eye of the beholder, like how we assess the consequences here. So once again,
that's
so I don't know.
Adam, I'm so glad you brought that up.
Yeah, I just had to mention that too.
Brings in questions of relativism and pluralism. It's all good grounds. I think in So Sam Harris actually has, this is a point that I think he makes really well in his book, The Moral Landscape, because he makes the point that pragmatically, you might actually have to go through a peak to reach a valley. And I wonder if the Singapore example is a valley that they had to go through to reach a peak, like maybe given that culture at that time and those constraints. I don't know. It's like obviously not true.
Yeah, that is a good question also. Is like, is that, if this is kind of like a valley, like will they eventually loosen up a bit, or is this like just the framework for society here? And like there's just indefinitely going forward, like that this is like the goal of like the structure of law.
And is the good of having certain freedoms that are not admitted in that society outweighing the costs it would incur by
okay, that does sound very subjective, and it certainly is in like polls and such between like West and East.
It's interesting. Okay, good. We actually raised a lot of interesting questions in this
great
podcast.
Paper choice.
Definitely. And it's really not a long paper.
No.
Well, it's longer than the page count makes you think it is.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
Because the font is small and the spacing is narrow, and
I was told 5 pages, instead it was 10, like double column. I was like, oh no. Me desperately reading the last 10 minutes before the podcast. That was a joke.
We knew.
I actually wasn't doing that, but
don't lie for the sake of consequences.
I wouldn't dare. I'm a pure retributivist.
Oh, you know what we should definitely do as a paper to kind of conclude this series is a paper on, because the reason I say to conclude is because I might actually have to ask a few people what paper to read, but we should do a paper on restorative justice. I've mentioned this before, but it might, given what Adam has said in this episode so far, I think that Adam might really like restorative justice, maybe in and of itself, but at the very least as maybe a bridge in between the current system we have now and then more of a consequentialistly justified one.
We
should definitely do a paper on that. I'll have to ask a certain philosopher I know who's like really into it about if there's like a good just base paper to read about it.
For sure.
Sounds great.
Okay, cool. Well then, so I don't know what the next episode will be on, but hopefully join us next time for that.